Hello and welcome to Web Relates. Today we're looking at the malicious compliance subreddit. Our first story is by lustriouslog, where the boss says, "I don't need your input, just do what I say." So my wife is having some issues at her work with multiple people of different levels of management telling her different things to do, depending on who's the manager on duty at the moment. I said she should do what the acting manager told her to do, and when another manager came on duty complaining about what she was doing, to relay what the previous manager had told her, and to let them work it out. I also said that she should document everything, so that she could relate it to HR if it became necessary to do so. I then explained to her about malicious compliance, and what it meant. This started me thinking about an incident at my old job at a manufacturing plant about 12 years ago. The building had two areas, a production or packaging area, and an attached shipping/receiving warehouse. The production area was air-conditioned or heated. The warehouse was heated, but only had roof exhaust fans and no AC, so it got pretty hot in the summer, but was bearable. We just moved slower. On end of Friday, we closed all the dock doors and shut off the exhaust fans, and closed the overhead door that separated the warehouse from the production areas. During the week, the overhead was open, but had those plastic flap strips you could drive a forklift through to keep the cool air in production. One Friday, the newish manager, who spent little actual time in that building, told us that we should keep the fans on and the separation overhead door open during the weekend to keep the temperature cooler in the warehouse. Why he cared, I really can't fathom. We tried to explain to him that with the dock doors closed, the roof fans would simply suck all of the cold air out of the production area. But he blew us off with the standard, "You will do as I instruct you to do." So, cue the malicious compliance. Monday comes that morning in July, and it was hot as all hell in the production area. The warehouse was the same temperature as always, and the coils on the production AC units had frozen, and we had to have people to come out and service them. All the manager had to say was, "Keep that separation overhead door closed at all times." Our next story is by Plasmafli. Boss ignores my background and learns the FAFO lesson all idiots do. I worked as a care staff for a private company of 250-ish employees that deals with special needs individuals, mental disabilities, and often physical ones. We have day hab facilities and group homes. In a prior job, I did the same for the state, but that was moved to an IT role after a while until the stupid from upper management became too great. Whole other story. Before any of that, I was an EMT, and before that I was in the army, and know how to cover my own butt. Backstory complete. My boss sent out an email to all staff and had an in-person company meeting because I put on a form the state inspectors look at that said, "Client returned from the day trip sunburnt, disoriented, and dehydrated. Staff at the client reported they passed out, apparent heat exhaustion. Reported to RN and state authority for possible neglect." Apparently the RN never looked at the report before the state auditors came in a week later, although she did look at the client and agreed with me about the heat exhaustion the next day when she was back in the office from a day off. Fast forward 9 days, we have an emergency company meeting. Boss hands out a paper specifically telling every staff they are not to do anything outside the scope of their job description, and they are not doctors, while staring at me the whole time. She calls me out specifically during the meeting by name. Alright, fine. I stopped doing anything but the exact wording of my original hiring duties. 2 months pass. One day I get a call about a problem with the computers at the main office in San Antonio. My job is over an hour away. I had traditionally done all of the IT troubleshooting, as I was one of the first hires of the company, and I had a background for it. Boss calls me on my day off and asks me to drive to the main office and fix their computer system. I said to her, "I cannot do anything outside of my listed duties. Per your order." Then I hung up on them and turned the phone off until after dinner. After I turned the phone back on, I got a call within 10 minutes from the company owner. He, who had been nothing but nice to me up until now, just bluntly asks, when I felt like doing my job and getting things working, but especially payroll, "Don't I want to get paid tomorrow? Get your butt in gear, son." That may indeed have been the wrong way to start the conversation with someone who wasn't being paid extra for their IT problems. I referred him to the email and in-person letter boss had put out. Then I pointed out how company policy had a no firearms rule. He specifically always carried a 1911 to all company meetings and events on his right hip, calling it out by model as a Kimber 4-inch. I then politely advised him to find a way to deal with his own problems, as the computers being bricked wasn't one of mine, that paying employees such as me was one of his, per state and federal law, and hung up. Turned my phone off again until I was at work 2 days later. In that time, apparently 3 staff had quit from failing to be paid, 18 more were threatening to, and the owner had driven over to have a chat with boss and myself. They laid out that as a senior care staff, my job role had expanded over the years I was there, 5 at that point, and I counted that the pay hadn't, at all, since I had been hired. My doing IT work was a charity from me, not a job requirement, and I appreciated none of the disrespect I had gotten lately from either of them. I also pointed out that I knew full well that a contract IT company would cost them at least hundreds, if not thousands, for a consult, and at least 200 an hour. If I deigned to fix their problem, it would take about 3 hours. Owner offered me a 50-cent raise and 3 hours overtime. I countered with a public apology in front of all staff from boss, a $3 per hour raise, and an exemption from the no-carry firearm policy he was being hypocritical about. They said no, so I said, I'll be in the back with the clients doing my job duties, and let me know when they contacted an IT company and changed their minds. Keep in mind that all the computer systems were effectively bricked at this point, so the nurses can't do any charting, no one can build time for casework. The state paperwork, while largely paper, can't be sent. It took them 4 days, who knows how many calls to computer specialists for quotes, and another 8 quitting employees to agree to my conditions, after 4 tries to get me to let go of the concealed carry one. That was their sticking point. I don't carry a gun at work, and never have, even though in my state it's totally legal. But it bugged me the absolute hypocrisy of the owner, so I would have given up the raise before that. In the end, it turns out the owner's wife deleted something she shouldn't have had access to, and it took all of 8 minutes to restore them from backups I personally had on an old hard drive I wasn't using that the company said was an unnecessary cost. Our next story is by withoutdennisnoir. How my friend got paid to find creative ways to sleep for 19 months. I have a very good friend who maliciously complied her way into getting paid for essentially doing absolutely nothing for 19 months. It was a government job, no surprise there. She and her colleague worked in a state office that kept track of plague cases among prairie dog towns. They were super busy trapping and testing all summer, but once winter comes, prairie dogs hibernate, so they ran out of work. They told their boss via email that there was no more work to do for the season that first autumn, and their boss responded by telling them to stand by for reassignment. So they did. For months. They didn't want to be accused of theft by just clocking in and out and leaving, so in the very beginning, they organized some storage spaces very slowly, cleaned their office several times, organized paperwork, and that sort of thing. When they ran out of stuff to do, they started sleeping, doing schoolwork, Sudoku, what have you. Initially, they slept in turns, as someone was always available if anyone came to check in on them. But when it became obvious that no one was coming, they stopped bothering. By summer the following year, when the prairie dogs came out of hibernation, and she thought her work might resume, the whole office, all the employees in every department, received an email from someone high up informing everyone that particular department had been cut. Don't know if it was unfunded, or they got all the data necessary the previous summer, or that particular pet project of some politician was forgotten about. But somewhere along the line, the State Fish and Game axed the project for whatever reason. Nothing was mentioned in the email about her job status, so her and her co-worker continued to go in and do nothing. She'd tell me about making a giant binder rubber band chain and roping 2 office chairs together facing each other to sleep in the seats. She's only 5 foot tall, so she fit relatively well, making a nest under her desk and moving the largest copy machine out of its cabinet and sleeping inside. They made sure the security people saw them periodically throughout the day, and they were on camera. Anyone above them paying attention would have noticed, but no one ever took the time. They dodged folks in the other departments for fear they'd get told on, and just minded their own business. They rarely had much interaction with other employees anyway. Eventually she ran into her boss at a show, and she asked my friend where she had found new work. My friend didn't lie and said she still worked there. Where? Where you left them. She said you should have seen her face when the lady put the pieces together and realized what was going on. The jig was up, and she and her colleague were let go that following morning by email before they went in. Because they had technically worked there for so long, I think 2 years was the threshold, they both got a little severance package. In case you're wondering, they got to keep their pay since, 1. They had proof they informed their boss they had no work, and she clearly saw the email and responded. 2. They still showed up. And 3, they did exactly what they were told. And 4, it wasn't their job to make sure they actually had work to do. They both qualified for unemployment to boot. Neither of them used the unemployment, since they had both been feeling like the gravy train was sure to derail any day, so they had new jobs lined up. This last story had a few related stories in the comments. The first is by Night Manager. A guy I worked for sold his company and joined Big Blue as a consultant in his company's field. He was assigned a mentor to help him transition from being an individual entrepreneur to a member of a large organization. He was to journal his feelings every day and then join a weekly group session to discuss. After a couple of weeks, the mentor stopped attending. They continued to meet, and a couple of weeks later they reached out to the person in HR who hired them all. The HR representative had left the company. They reached out again to a higher level, and they were told to continue with their current assignments and someone would contact them. So, he continued to stay at home and write in his journal. It took 18 months before they realized what was happening and laid off the entire group. He was making $250,000 a year, keeping a journal about how messed up his large organization was, and how an individual owner would never let this happen. The next comment is by P.T. Sorrell. This kinda happened to a guy I knew in the Navy, way back when, late 90s. The job I did required a high-level security clearance, and a lot of people would show up without one, or at least with the investigation still ongoing. So it was common practice to have them phone muster, and in a few weeks their clearance would come through, and they'd badge up and start to work. It was generally used as a time to get settled in, find a place to stay, and a car if needed. The general, I'm new here type of stuff. Well, I was in the barracks, and we'd hang out at the pool table and drink and stuff. This guy started showing up, and we became friends. After a while, we asked what command he was with, and he told us it was ours, and said he was waiting for his clearance. We had been hanging out for months at this point. We were all surprised and asked what the issue was. He said he didn't know, but had been phoning muster every day, and had a log of when he called in, who he spoke to, and what they said. This was based on advice he'd gotten from someone else early on. Months go by. A year. 16 months. Still nothing. This kid was being paid to hang out at the barracks and drink, and learn to play the guitar. He actually got pretty good after a while. Finally, there was a command-wide urinalysis. He never got notified. The jig was up. The CMC, who was a very large, very angry-looking Samoan, came storming into the barracks screaming for this dude. When he was found, he was in PT gear with a full beard. The Master Chief started ripping into him and ordered him to be German-shaved and in uniform and in his office in an hour. The kid was, with his phone log in hand. Kid showed up and starts getting yelled and screamed at and told he was a total piece of crap and his career was over, and you got the idea. When he finally got a chance to speak, he explained what had happened and showed the CMC his phone log. Master Chief gets real, still takes the book, and dismisses the kid, telling him to report to him the next day. CMC goes to the security office and starts asking questions. Long story short, the office gets torn apart looking for this kid's file, and it can't be found. They go so far as to start tearing the cubicles apart, and finally find the kid's file. It had slipped out of an overfull inbox, fell between a desk and a cubicle wall. The kid comes in the next day and told he's not in trouble as he did what he was supposed to. The security office was, and an assistant was sent to Captain's mast. The kid started working directly for the CMC until his clearance came in, and he spent the rest of his tour on the watch floor with a great story to tell. Alright everyone, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe to the channel. And then until the next video, cheers.